Hello and welcome to the 2025 sailing season, at least those of you in the northern climates that have sailing seasons. I've got a list as long as my arm for fixes and improvements to Titania once again. My main pre-splash job this year is I want to replace one of the keel bolts. I learned from a previous owner that about half the bolts were replaced roughly 10 years ago, and when I ground the keel down the first season it was pretty obvious visually which were the new ones. At that time, I made notes on which were new before I covered up the heads with caulk. The Cherokee has 16 bolts, which are 3/4 inch in diameter, and has a bevel head with a slot which faces downward and then a nut in the cabin. I'm going to replace the second bolt from the front on the starboard side. I was able to find exactly zero info on the web about these bolts, but I did discover that the Pearson 26 has the same exact keel design, although I believe its bolts are 5/8 of an inch. One interesting feature is that the Cherokee has a large trapezoidal metal plate in the bilge, which serves to reinforce the forward 8 bolts. I'm guessing this is to strengthen the front in case of a grounding, but there's also a collar molded into this plate, which serves as the receiver for the bottom of the mast. All right, I managed to scrape that caulk off pretty easily and then went at it a little bit more with the wire wheel. I think that's as much as I can really remove before I try and loosen this nut. It doesn't look that rusty, which I guess maybe I shouldn't get myself optimistic. Anyway, it doesn't look that rusty. We'll see soon. Well, I guess I've run into my first snag. It didn't take long. The nut was turning, but I was suspicious whether it was really turning on the bolt or just turning the bolt. So I came down here and sure enough, it's just spinning the whole thing. But here you can see, this is the first keel bolt and here's the second one. In my first season, I had filled these all in with life caulk, life seal, one of those two, and then epoxy primered over it, and then bottom coated over that, and it seems like it's held pretty much. None of them have any cracks that I can see, so I think it's keeping the water out. So I just dug that out pretty easily with a utility knife, and you can see the head of the bolt. And of course, because it's one of the old ones, and the reason I want to replace it is that it's so corroded that the slot in it, it has a slot for a flathead screwdriver, is very poorly defined, so it's hard to grab. Also, I don't have a screwdriver that's like 1 1/8 inch across, so I may have to run to Lowe's to get that. And as you might expect, this thing's not coming out easily. Yeah, the problem really is that the slot is so corroded. There's no way to really get in there. Maybe with a Dremel and a cutoff wheel, you could make it deeper, but the angle of the head looks very shallow. So I don't know if you can make it very deep without cutting into the keel. So I've just shifted gears and decided to try and drill out the center, which I've done many times on other bolts, but never one on a bolt quite this big. Yeah, I think I'm going to get a step bit to help speed it up. Well, I got it out. I can't deny it was quite painful. Basically, I tried to drill the center of the bolt out. That wasn't really working. Then I used an oscillating tool to try and cut chunks out using the edge of the hole I drilled. And then I finally resorted to a cold chisel and just hacking giant chunks of it out, of the head that is, until finally I could drive the whole thing up into the boat, which leaves me with this. It's shorter than I expected. Maybe 3 inches, 3.5 inches long. I'll get it measured, but I'm Looks like maybe it's a 5/8 bolt. But at least I now know its dimensions, so I can get a new one ordered. That whole process of removing this one bolt was about 5 hours, I think. So needless to say, I am doing one this year, and that gives me a year to come up with a better way to do the next one. Yeah, and it looks like it's got some kind of sealant, caulk, I don't know what, going up the threads. So I guess I'll reinstall this by just totally filling the passageway with something. I have to think about what. And then I'm not really sure whether it should go under the head. I kind of feel like, I don't know if that interferes with the torquing, but now I got a couple weeks to figure it out. So the plan now is I'm gonna use a drill with a wire wheel on it to try and clean out that cavity in the bottom of the hull as best as possible, and maybe a little sandpaper, acetone it, and then give it some protection with this epoxy bottom paint here. So I ended up ordering some new keel bolts from Granger. There was a package of 5. I think it was about $20 for 5 of these. And I could not find one with a slotted head, so I went with the hex beveled head. And I also couldn't find one of the right dimensions with galvanizing. So I'm gonna have an attempt at zinc coating it with electrolysis here at my house. But these look pretty robust. Okay, the first thing I did was go at it with a wire wheel. I don't know if you can tell. I should put one of the original ones next to it, but it is kind of a gray now instead of just jet black. I'm trying to remove this black oxide coating. I'm going to get some muriatic acid, which I heard will do it, but until I get that, I thought I would let it soak in just some white vinegar, because I had heard online that an acid will take any kind of oxide off. And I guess this is, well, black oxide. Technically a kind of rust. So I'm gonna let that sit and see if that makes a difference. And here you can see the one on the left has been wire wheeled and soaked for about an hour in white vinegar. You can definitely see that a lot, if not most of the black oxide has come off. Now, just for overkill maybe, or just to be triple sure, and also to degrease it, I'm going to put it into some muriatic acid thinned out, I think something like 4 parts water, 1 part muriatic acid, and then I think it'll be ready to go. Okay, here I'm charging the plating solution, which is about 2/3 distilled water, 1/3 vinegar, and about 2 tablespoons of salt. I've got this cheap little maybe it was $13 generic supply, voltage supply, and my 2 zinc strips here. So basically, you run this for about an hour, and the zinc ions all end up kind of in solution, and that prepares it for the plating, in theory. First time I've ever done this, so I'm very excited. I think this would be a very useful skill to have, especially because it's exactly the same as nickel plating. So who knows, maybe I'll be plating everything that's not bolted down in my house. So this is it after 10 minutes maybe in the plating solution with the current. So far I'm pretty happy with this. I think it does need a little bit more. There's pretty good coverage on the threads, and maybe right in here it could use a little bit more. I do especially want it to be somewhat thick under the head. Not having that much experience with this, I have been reading online that there's sort of a light gray, there's a darker gray and a light gray, so it might be that dark spot is also zinc plated just fine, but maybe not as heavily. But doesn't cost any money to put it right back in for another couple minutes, and yeah, certainly it's better than nothing. And I think I've spent maybe 20 bucks on this, so, and I know how to do it next year when I go to do another bolt. So after another batch of time, I'm glad I did that, because I think it actually looks pretty good. Looks like a galvanized bolt. And I spent part of the time with only one anode and had this end pointed toward it to try and get that zinc down into that recess there. And that seems like, it's not 100% perfect, but it really seems like it helped. Now, time to install it. Okay, I didn't actually record any sound while I was filming this, and it was very hard to film because my wife was down below keeping the bolt from spinning. I was up in the cabin with the torque wrench, and you can see from the black around it that I actually sort of filled the hole with life caulk and then covered the ends of the threads of the bolt with some blue tape. So when I pushed the bolt up, it didn't like goo up all the threads. Once it was up in the cabin, I took that off and I was able to torque down the nut. I decided to torque it to 125 foot-pounds. I didn't find anything on the internet, of course, what it should be. This is what the Pearson 26 bolts are apparently torqued to. The bolt itself, I think, can take like 280 foot-pounds, but I didn't know about the effect on the fiberglass and so on, so we're trying 125 for now. By the way, the rated tensile strength of these bolts is 130,000 psi, which gives it, for this size bolt, a tensile strength of about 50,000 pounds. The keel is only 3,300 pounds, so one bolt can hold, 10 keels and there's 16 bolts. So I think it's a pretty strong setup, needless to say. Okay, I've put on the another coat of this epoxy barrier coat on top of the bolt. This was after I used some acetone to clean up the squeeze out of the life seal that was in there, or life caulk. And then it's kind of raining, so I made a little tent here so that water wouldn't drip down into this. Next step is to fair this out with some microlight filler. I apologize, I didn't get any video of that, but basically it's just some West Systems epoxy with their microlight filler and then some more epoxy bottom paint and then regular bottom paint, and then the job was done.